Oh, little birdie, spring has sprung! Out with the old, in with the new. Like trading in the big store for Dollar General. You'll get the same big store savings without the big store hassle. And with no hike to the store, you're even closer to the name brands you love. Like fresh, tastic Gain detergent. It's spring in a bottle, people! Stop by Dollar General before Sunday, spend $15 on Gain-scented items, and get 5 off your next trip. Dollar General, it's the fast way to save.
Blog Talk Radio.
Peace and greetings, everyone. Welcome to Civil Alert. This is your host, Sent Asha, here with you for the Thursday night airing of Hidden History. Hidden History is a bi-monthly segment that focuses on our history, the Moorish history here and abroad internationally. And the host of, the main presenter of the Hidden History segment is Amani Bey. And, we have coined him to be the Moorish Nation's international researcher and field researcher and scholar. Amani is currently in Japan. He originally is from the California area. And tonight we are going to go into the topic that is very hot, which is Moors versus Moors. The reason why I say it's hot is because by tradition, many of us, myself included, at some point in time was fixated on the point that historically what was going on with our people was always against albinos. But, as you start digging and you learn more, start reading and looking at things for what it is, and especially at looking at what's going on today in the society, what we have is a situation where it is our own people that is a part of the problem with trying to suppress their own. So I guess, we could call them traitors. And so tonight, just like how previously when Amani was on, this will be a full-fledged expose on this with a lot of documented references. So be sure you have your pen and your paper ready. Now, one thing this is going to be a little change up for tonight is that Anaid L is actually going to be hosting and leading everything, and I'm just, coming on to just do a brief intro. Y'all, I got mad stuff to do, and one of the things that I have to do is to prep for an upcoming Saturday series, and it's actually a webinar series focusing on foreclosures, and that webinar session is going to be led by Elijah Israel. You all pretty much heard Elijah when he was on about a month and a half ago where he had won his case in regards to the adverse possession. The brother has tons of information and a lot of knowledge that he has been utilizing to help people with dealing with their foreclosures. And as we know, this is happening all over the world, all over the country. So these classes are geared to provide firsthand, in-depth, detail, information, education, legal references, and things of that nature for people that are looking to address their situations or who are looking to help situations, that their friends or family may have. To get information about the Saturday classes, please send an email to news@civilalertradio.com. Again, that's news@civilalertradio.com. Or you can contact me direct at 404-944-2072. Again, that's 404-944-2072. The introduction to everything will occur on this Saturday. That's this upcoming Saturday at 10 a.m., and it's going to run from 10 to 1. And you can just call or send an email because everything will be online, and I'll be able to send over all of the information. All right, so without any further delay, I'm going to bring on Anaid as well as Amani shortly. Anaid, welcome to Civil Alert.
Peace, Natasha, and good evening to everyone who is currently listening.
Yes, I thank you for being on because, previously I know that this was a topic that was discussed and it pretty much provided clarity about several things because, the one question that I always had in my brain, I said, now, who was this King George that was able to provide authorization for a whole body of people to come into America and to give them a charter to occupy some land? I'm like, how do you just get up and do something like that?
Yeah.
So, when Amani, he pretty much discussed, and you have as well, saying like who exactly is who, which is what we pretty much highlighted on that last show on last Thursday. So this is definitely going to be a good continuation. And Anaid, what I always think about is, you know, what's going on today, where we have our own people who are, you know, pretty much the head of a lot of these sheriff departments, the police departments, and things of that nature, and even, you know, as me and you discussed, the child protective services. Most of the things that are going on that are oppressing and literally re-enslaving the peoples, they have our own, especially within the heart of the metropolitan areas. It's us who's carrying out the functions.
Yeah,
which is
right.
Sad and sad but true.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And you know, this was something that was brought to my attention, the fact that, you know, this whole issue from inception to this day, it's all about Moors fighting Moors. And one teacher that absolutely does an excellent job of breaking it down is Valera. If anybody, if you don't know, Valera gives information really well, and she has a DVD called Battle and Battelle, or Battle versus Battelle, and she breaks it down so well that it really makes you sit back and say, And even while you're listening to her break down, you know, the Moors versus Moors, in the back of your mind, what you're going to find is you always knew this.
So battle versus battle and
it's Battle versus Battelle, and it's a DVD that she has, and she really breaks down, you know, that really what we're dealing with here is Moors fighting Moors. And, you know, when she did that, I really I went into like if anyone is, I went to the Avalon Project website, website, and they have like all the treaties, all the wars, everything. And what I did was I downloaded it and started looking at dates, looking at who's who, and what you're gonna find is there's never, ever been any war between Moors and Europeans where Europeans won. Ever. Every war that has ever been fought and won where the Moors were involved, it was between Moors and Moors. Europeans just stood on the sideline waiting for the dust to settle and then came in and claimed whatever we hard-hearted Moors left lying about. And that included not just the property, but the children, the babies.
You're on time with that, Anaid, because it made me think about how even today you ain't have mother and father warring against each other. And then on the sideline, here comes the Child Protective Services and everybody else coming to swoop up the kids or the children.
Yeah.
And then placing them into foster homes and collecting finance off of them.
Yes. And, you know, with that, I just want to say we as people, we really need to grow up. You cannot walk around behaving as though you are. See, people have this confusion about being a child and being an adult. Most of our people think that when you get this big body, you're an adult. No. An adult is someone who is capable of handling their affairs. An adult does never, ever call foreign Europeans to come and handle their affairs. I don't care if it's an issue where, you know, your property was stolen, your car was stolen, you know, you might have been involved in some sort of altercation, somebody disrespect. We as a people, who functioned as competent people, able to handle our own affairs, we never, ever called foreign Europeans to handle any of our affairs, ever.
Mm-hmm. That's a point to ingest and to really just for people to put into motion.
And that's why they take advantage of us today, because we got so many people. I mean, you know, we get into it. First of all, if we can't sit down and reason our way out of situations, then we have no business interacting with, you know, other Moors, period. So, you know, but we should all have enough self-love of ourselves, and self-love of ourselves permeates to self-love of our fellow brothers and sisters, to know that if we get into any kind of situation and it might come to blows, walk away. Walk away, cool off, get some clarity, and then come back and sit down and talk. We should never, ever be in a situation where we are so angry at each other that we can't sit down and talk, and now we got to go call foreign Europeans. That is the height of incompetence. But
very good point.
We do great.
Very good.
Because I think Amani might be holding.
Okay, let's see here. I was just going to look to see if he's on here. Amani, you could just press option 1, and then you'll be placed to the top of the queue. Let's see. I believe we do have him here. Okay. You see him there, Anaid?
I think I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me say this all right.
Amani, are you there?
Yes. Yes, Islam, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I would like to apologize to the listening family there. I know that last show, sometimes during my presentation, I was breaking in and out, so I had some technical difficulties. Hopefully, it's better now. But if it gets to a point where I start breaking in and out again, please let me know, because I don't want the family to miss anything, not a single word.
Yes.
Well, all right. Well, I am thankful, that you're here to bring in more insights. And so, I pretty much will be exiting the call. And I am looking, but, I would definitely be checking out this archive because Amani, the information that you bring, and especially to Anaid with your information, I know that another portal is about to be open. So until a bit later, I'll be speaking to you all, and I just thank you for everything that you all bring.
All righty.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Peace and love, everybody.
All right, peace and love.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's just me and Amani now in this listening audience, so I am so excited about what you're about to share because, like I said with Natasha, until you have certain pieces of information, things just don't come together, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces just don't fit. So the information that you're getting ready to drop, I'm just going to shut up, put my phone on mute so there's no distractions, and I'm just going to let you talk, for at least, about a good hour or 45 minutes or, until you feel ready to take some questions because I'm just excited to hear what else you have to share. So the floor is yours, Amani.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I will, present information and may stop to ask whether or not the family has any questions. So we'll do it that way. And just to expand upon some of the topics I had discussed in the previous show, which was the entitled Who's Who. And so now we're going to deal with Moor versus Moor, because I want to make it clear that I know due to miseducation, misinformation, and the sorcery, we were all told and taught in the Jesuit institutions that we suffered, we continue to suffer at the hands of a very, very powerful enemy. And basically that enemy is so powerful, based upon the story that, the colored story or the cover story that they teach us all the time, is that the enemy is so powerful that there's just no hope for us. But we're told that the enemy doesn't really look like us, not as melanated as us. And so that's the cover story that they've been selling, and we bought into that, and not knowingly or unknowingly, that by buying into that, you give them power. So you're giving power to a group of people that do not have that power, never had it to begin with. But they feed off of us by using fear tactics and fear mongering. But we are going to destroy all of that colored information, misinformation, which is used to engender fear. Because a real Moor, a real Asiatic, fear is not part of the equation. Fearless. And we're going to get into that there. And to real Moors. And so, just like the topic states, Moor versus Moor, because we must remember, and I mentioned this before, only a Moor can defeat a Moor. And everyone knows that deep in their heart. Only a Moor can defeat a Moor. To make it simplified so all can understand, I can use an example, an analogy. Is just like, the great Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson in their heyday. What particular non-melanated individual or Albion can get in the ring with those Moors or Asiatics in their heyday? Impossible. So they fought other Moors who defeated them. So similarly, just in this particular case here, if you understand that, this topic is not difficult to understand. So let's get into more. I will start in Europa before coming over to the Americas. So we'll start in Europa and some of the major important battles, wars that had occurred, and which decided which particular family or division of Moors would reign supreme in Europa. And so, but before going to the specific details of the war, I will again make sure everyone's clear on when we're talking about the people in Europa during this time, and that they were melanated. I will again expand upon that point because some people may have missed a previous show. So as we mentioned before, the Iberians, which you're talking current Al-Andalus or Spain, Portugal, were melanated. And of course the topic of the American Association of Anthropologists meeting in 2009, March 28th through the 31st, where the topic of their discussion was European skin turned pale quite recently. So it's no secret. This is well-known information. And so we're going to expand upon that. Just to expand upon the Iberians, for example, they were called by many names. And the Moorish Latin, Silures, that's Silurs, and you can get information and the histories written by Tacitus, where he talks about the Asiatics and whom he called the Silures, and he gave a physical description of them being very, very melanin rich, of a dark hue with curly hair. And you can also find this information in a work called The History of the Druids on page 336, where it gets into the Silures. And that particular geographic location is present-day Al-Andalus, or what they call Spain, and parts of Portugal as well. So during Tacitus's time, this is what the people looked like. You see, so again, this goes counter to the misinformation we've been fed about, Asiatics entering into that geographical location in 711 under General Tariq. And as I mentioned before, that no, the Asiatics were always there. They're autochthonous there. So that's unquestionable. That's based upon undisputable facts by going into the ancient records. Okay? So we just established that. So now, I think I mentioned before about Princess Scota, the daughter of a Talmerian pharaoh, whom many would call an Egyptian pharaoh, had sent his daughter with a part of his military there to settle in those particular areas as well. Now, one of the reasons why that was an important area, and we're talking present day, the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, that particular location. That particular location was very important to a lot of Asiatic nations, because it was the place for a very important resource called tin. So most of your tin mines were in that location. So many Asiatic nations wanted a piece of that particular resource there. So the Talmerian pharaoh wanted some of it, so he sent a division and his daughter to settle those lands. But of course, there were Asiatics there when they got there, who were autochthonous to that particular area, and they're known in history as Picti, or the Picts. So, of course, you had the line from Princess Scota, and you had the Picts as well. And you also had another family of Asiatics called the Cimbri, or the Dani, or popularly phrased as the Danes. And in the year 844, everything came to a head. And there was a great war between these three groups of Moors, or Asiatics, for supremacy of all of Europa. So let's just get into some of the details of this one of the most important wars in all of Europa. I know that many may have not heard of these wars, but they're very, very important when it comes to our history. And so let's just get into the details here. Now, during the year 844, you had now this information comes from the source information for this comes from Celtic Scotland. Okay, a word called Celtic Scotland, and this is volume 1, page 308, page 321 and page 366. Now, it gets into, and it talks about, for example, the year 844, the 12th year of Kenneth's reign, and according to the Chronicle of Huntington, tells us that in his 12th year, he encountered the Picti, or Picts, 7 times in one day, and having destroyed many, confirmed the kingdom to himself. Thus, by the year 844, the Scots, or the Scots being the line from Princess Skoda, and the Picts, somewhat different in manners, but all alike, thirsting for blood, had completely fallen out among themselves. And the former being the Kenneth's line, or the Douglases, Dubglass as well, conquered them. So basically, they defeated the Picti, and it is to believe that half were exterminated, though the year 844 did not put an end to the reign of the Picts in Scotland. From that date, however, the customs of the Egyptians, or Tamarians, must have been paramount for a considerable time in certain parts of North Britannia. Okay, so that's end quote there. So just to give details that in the year 844, there was a great battle between the Picti and the line from Skoda, and the Picti had lost that particular war, and so the Victoria side, being led by King Kenneth, reigned supreme. Okay, so also we're talking about the Kenneth. It's a very famous family line where we have the Kennedys, and a very, very famous family in Galloway, Scotland. And so the Kennedy line comes directly from Kenneth, who was king of Albion, which we get Albany from. And as we know, that the king of Albion, Kenneth, was also overseeing a group of people that we currently call Albions. You see, so but the ruler was a Moor during that time. So we have an example here of Moors warring against each other for supremacy in Europa. And let's get deeper. Now we're dealing with the time 844, 9th century. So let's just move a few centuries in the future, and we can continue here with another war in the year 1160. And here, during this war, it gives a clear example of the birthright theft, and the winning side applied certain tactics to steal the birthright. Now, again, we must be clear that these are Moors against Moors. So in the year, now this word comes from Celtic Scotland, okay? Volume 1, page 328. In the year 1160, Malcolm, the grandson and successor of David, found it necessary to march into this nominally conquered country in order to quell a revolt of the natives, and to follow up his invasion with a proceeding that was calculated to put an end to any further trouble in that quarter from these people. In that year, he removed them all from their land of birth and scattered them throughout the other districts in Scotland, both beyond the hills and other areas, so that there was not a native remaining. And then he installed his own people, unquote. Okay. Am I clear so far?
Yes, you are. Very, very clear. You know, there's some brief, really brief moments of, where the line blurs a little bit, but it's not taking away.
Okay, great. All right, so here's an example of clear outright birthright theft in the year 1160, the 12th century. Now, this is important because these same tactics developed or formed the foundation and basis for future nations, and so these particular group of Moors laid the foundation of successful solutions to basically steal birthrights of other nations. And so these tactics were used in the preceding centuries, and even up to today. So, but again, our topic deals with Moor versus Moor. And then remember, we talked about Europa. All these events occurred in Europa. Now, and so now we have a clear picture that during the 8th, 9th century, those major wars were Moors, wars where there were Moors fighting other Moors. Okay? So we dealt with the War of 844, and again in the 12th century, 1160, and 1160 gives us an example of birthright theft. And later on, when we get to dealing with the Americas, we're going to find similar examples of birthright theft where they use similar tactics. So upon that, now, during that time, of course, you had what's called the division of Moors or Asiatics called the Douglases, a dub glass, in the ancient Gael or Gaelic language. Now, their power started to fade in the 15th century, and so let's get into that part there. And now, of course, King Henry VIII actually had a plan, a plot, to strip the power away from the remaining powerful Douglases, including the priest class, or the priests, the popes. So let's get into this particular, or these events here in detail here. All right. Now, if you have any questions so far, please feel free to ask. If anyone has their hands up, I can take a question or two.
No one has raised their hands yet, but I just have one thing I want to be clear about that I want to throw out there. When you talk about birthright theft, I know what that means as it relates to today. But when you talk about the Moors, fighting Moors and them stealing each other's birthright, what exactly does that mean or entail? Are we talking about stealing, all their property, their land, like their names?
Well, in the example we just gave in 1160 with King Malcolm and what he had did there by subduing a different nation of Asiatics and removing them from their land of birth. So that is an example of removing an autochthonous nation of people from the land of their ancestors.
All right.
And then he scattered them in other districts, which means that he put them in other areas.
Amani? Amani? Hello? Amani? Okay. Hello? Amani? All right. I think we might have lost Amani somehow. Give us a moment, and we'll see if he.
Hello, can you hear me?
Amani? Oh, you're back. Yes. Wonderful. What was that?
Sorry about that. Did you hear my last comment there?
You were getting ready to go into what that meant, and then it just blanked out.
Okay, so based upon what we had just read on the manuscripts dealing with those events during that time in the year 1160, and what King Malcolm had laid down, and that example of birthright theft is an example of land birthright theft, where you remove your Autochthonous people from their land and replace them with a different people, with his own people, who were not from that particular area.
All right.
Although, if we're talking about the general country or itself, they're all now. Of course, remember the line of the Scots actually come from Princess Skoda, and they're
Amani? Well, this is interesting. Amani? All right, hold on a minute. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. Amani?
Hello?
Yeah, all right, you're back.
Oh, you lost me again, huh?
Yes. When you started going into Princess Skoda, it just blanked out.
Oh, wow. Okay, we have a problem here. Let's see here.
That's real interesting. I've never heard it done that before. But getting back into Princess Skoda, the line you were saying the line comes from Princess Skoda.
Right. So those Tarmarians who became Scots in the year 1160, when they took the land away, or birthright, example of birthright theft, by taking the autochthonous pigs from their land and removing them from their lands and settling them in other districts outside, and bringing his own people to settle those lands. That's an example of birthright theft when it pertains to land. So just to continue here, am I live? Or?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, so just to continue.
Yeah.
So after that, as I mentioned before, the line of the Douglas or Douglases started losing their power, started to wane at the end of the 15th century. And now during King Henry VIII's reign, he had a plan to remove their power, and basically he focused on removing the power of the priest class. Okay? So let's get into that information there pertaining to those events. Now, this information comes from the Celtic Scotland as well, and it's a letter. It's a letter. No, and it comes from, in Latin, it's called Collectania de Rebus Albanicus, page 23 through 32. All right, so, quote, in a letter which was written to Henry VIII by a Catholic clerk named John Elder. In this letter, the writer speaks of those bishops, monks, and priests as though they were of a different nation from himself, a large section of which his compatriots and the king, Henry VIII, was writing about. And he points out the lineage of those bishops and others in these words. They derive Scotland and themselves from a certain lady named Princess Scota, which came out of Tamaray, or Egypt. This is to say, he plainly classifies a certain ruling caste as Scots or Egyptians. This letter, which was written to the Tudor king, Henry VIII, knowing what true faithful hearts the most part of the commons of Scotland, beyond the water forth. And it continues here. Hold on one second here. Okay, and it is interesting in many ways that between the two widely separated sections of British people at a period that antedated the evolution of James of Scotland by 60 years, and the priestly hierarchy was composed of men descended from quite another race than the writer, the current writer. And that race was Egyptians. Here it is distinctly asserted that in the 16th century, the priesthood of Scotland, which John the Elder himself was a member, was overran by gypsies, or gypsy priests. And they derived their descent and by right of blood from the Scots of early Scota, who they drew their descent from Scota, the daughter of a pharaoh. Okay? So, basically, in that letter, King Henry VIII was informed by his clerk to come up with a way to strip the power of the monks or the priest caste. And this was, a successful plan. And we can give an example of the success by one of the, one of the priests was actually jailed. And he was the last remaining most powerful gypsy priest or Asiatic priest who was actually jailed. Now, when we're talking King Henry VIII, and also in this particular work, it doesn't get into King Henry VIII's physical appearance, but we cannot assume that King Henry VIII physically looked different than the gypsy monks, because we just gave examples of the wars for supremacy, for power, where they were all Moors fighting each other. Now, also, I'd like to point this out here. Just to expand upon Henry VIII here, and the work called the St. Patrick Myth of 1883. So it says here, in an article on the St. Patrick Myth, when we're referring to the tradition that the Gadelas, grandson of the Pharaoh who pursued Israel, had conquered Ireland and established therein his posterity, today known as the God-Els or Gaels, where we get basically Gaelic from. It appears incredible that this vast mass of traditions, many of which are not biblical, but nearly all pointing to the Egyptian or Jewish regions, could have been invented and introduced into the Bible into Ireland. And it may be remarked here that to admit the identity of the God-Els with the ancient Egyptians is to say that the early Scots and early Gaels were one and the same people. At first sight, this insinuated King Henry VIII, and Henry VIII's reign prior to it bore a certain resemblance to Orthodox gypsies. Then it continues here that Henry VIII had overthrown the last remaining priests, gypsy priests in the monastery. Unquote there. Okay, so with the Douglases losing power, and of course the priest class losing power towards the 14th, 15th century, things were really changing in Europa. And certain groups of Moors lost power, and other groups of Moors started gaining more power. Okay, so this is just some examples of Moors in Europa vying for power there in the 9th century all the way up to the 14th century. And we can stop there before I move on, and definitely before I get into the Americas. If there are any questions or so.
I just want to remind everyone who's listening, if you have a question, we've got some questions here. All right. I just want to also say that we've got a lot of information to cover, and I want to get as much of it in as possible. So if you do have questions, can you, keep them as brief and to the point as possible, all right? All right, so caller 850-459.
I don't have any questions. Somehow I got put online, but I don't have any questions, though.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, caller 757-470.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace to the family. My question real quick was if you could talk on the about the Moorish involvement in the church early on, because I've come across, or if you could speak on like Saint Maurice and Moors that how does that relate? The Moors in Europe and the Catholic Church and its rise to power and everything.
Okay, well, as I just gave an example of a group of Moorish priests in the area today called England, Scotland, who they basically lost their power in the 15th century. And so your priest class, prior to all that, were of Asiatic stock. And then later on, when we're talking after 15th century, 16th century, phenotypically they, more and more become more amalgamated. But when we, so the priest and the church in and of itself were, the members were all Asiatic. Now you can go to not only the prose, written prose in the ancient manuscripts, but there's also visual evidence as well, where now, of course, unfortunately, I can't share any of the visual images I have with the family because we don't have that particular type of technology, unfortunately. But yes, the Moors, the priest class in Europa were Moors. And I just gave an example of the Moorish priests in England who were stripped of their power. And one King Henry VIII, was instrumental in taking away their power. And we just gave some examples there. Now, with St. Maurice, on the other hand, that's a different topic and subject matter. But the story is he was originally from Tomaray and went to helped fight in Europa with other Christians and was killed in battle and was martyred and became a saint in Europa. So the sources I have on Maurice aren't here with me on hand, so I can't really get into deep detail about Saint Maurice, but he was martyred due to his support for Christians in Europa against certain Romans. So that's the story, general story about Saint Maurice, and he was martyred, and the subsequent Christian nations highly revered him, and many would go into battle with Maurice insignia on them. So you can see a lot of the Maurice history in today what's called Germany today. So we can maybe get into that, into different personalities on a different show, which is a great topic, getting into different personalities during certain periods in history.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because I've always wondered how did that play out with the rise of the Catholic Church and the original Moorish, inhabitants of Europe or Europa.
Yeah,
that
I mean, right. For example, the parliamentarians, during the 15th century, 16th century onwards, when they started creating these statutes to outlaw the Moors, everything Moorish, for example. So when it came to the priest class, a lot of the priests had, a lot of hobbies that they like to do. For example, they love shooting dice. They love to play dominoes. All those so-called Moorish or gypsy activities were actually banned, and they're still on the books in England to this very day. The parliamentarians ban all gypsy activities like dice, dominoes, golf. The game golf, which was a gypsy game, was actually banned during the 16th century. So you couldn't play golf. You couldn't do any. The dress style of the Moors were outlawed. You couldn't wear big, bright, colorful hats. You couldn't tilt them to the side. So all those gypsy habits were actually outlawed. And of course, many of the gypsy priests, they had activities as well, and they were all banned. And they're all on the books. You can do the research on that. So yes, we can. That's definitely an interesting topic there that we can get into more specifically and create a theme around that particular topic on a subsequent show.
Yeah, that and we'll have to plan that for another show. But to get and thank you so much for your question, caller. And so I want to get back on track with the information that you were bringing, because I do know for the people that are listening, if you might not be aware, but the original, what is today known as the Catholic Church, the popes, and the Jesuits, all of that initially was created by Moors. So that was slowly infiltrated by what you see today, which is Europeans. And some of the information that Amani is giving, that ties into that history, that piece of information, and you can do some further research, and it'll tie in even more. And actually, on previous shows and shows to come, there'll be additional information that will help tie that in a little better. So, Amani, I'd like for you to continue. I don't see anyone else who has their hand up for questions. So if you want to continue, let's see, it is 10:35. So, for another 10, 15 more minutes, just to give some information, and then we'll open it up and or briefly take questions from anyone.
Okay, great. So I'll continue, and let's kind of move fast forward a bit to a more closer time period, basically dealing with here in the Americas. Oh, but before I move into the Americas, I also want to share this information here, basically about the current system, feudal system, that still survives to this very day, especially in the Union State Society. So let's get into that a bit. Now, today there are many instruments we use. For example, the passport instrument. That particular instrument. Now, that particular instrument has its history with the Asiatics in Europa. Okay, so I wanted to kind of highlight that because we're still subject to similar instruments to this very day here. And let's get into this here. Now, this comes from the work, again, Celtic Scotland, okay? And so basically, they were called passports or tokens. And if anyone was found without this token when traveling in a different district, this individual was liable to be plundered, beaten, and driven back to its own territory by those gypsies whose rights he had infringed upon. Now, of course, when they mean infringe upon, they mean basically entering into another district without without the particular passport or the token there. So the tokens would give protection, and it would also have the signia of your particular nation or area, district that you came from, and then basically they would also need to know what type of business you have in their particular area as well. So here again we have this particular instrument that goes back to Europa, and of course that particular system there that those Asiatics had created is what we call a feudal system, you see. And so the very same system was introduced to the Americas, which formed the Union State Society, which many of us are still under today. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that so we're clear on that as well before going into the Americas. So in the Americas, again, just to make it clear, you had what they call settlers coming from different parts of Europa to the Americas. Now, you have to understand that those, when I mean settlers, I'm not talking about slaves, okay? So we can't confuse those who were not slaves who were coming over. So, for example, many of the gypsies who had lost their land and power in Europa were actually sent to many of the colonies in the Americas, Australia, New Zealand, and they were sent there to actually be overseers. Who did they oversee? Well, they oversaw the slaves. Now, I know that in the Union State Society, they were very successful, and I pointed it out in last show how they were very successful in reconstructing the histories when it came to who were the slaves. Now, I don't know if any of the family ever been out to Australia or New Zealand, but it's not as covert there. The information is basically is taught there that the descendants who came from England came there as slaves. So that's open information there in Australia and New Zealand. And, for example, I believe it was in the year 2006, the Prime Minister of Australia demanded an apology from the British royal family for shipping them there as slaves from the 16th century to the 20th century. And they demanded an apology. So that's open information there. But we know the case in the United States Society. They're successful in reconstructing the histories and throwing the term on Asiatics. Now, the slaves that were sent from England to the Americas, they also sent many gypsies there as well. And that's all documented. So the Asiatics in the Americas, of course, fought against each other since the beginning of time. It's a natural thing. But we need to kind of highlight this so we can understand that events did not happen the way they told us events happened. So let's get into some of the events pertaining to Moors versus Moors in the Americas. Now, I'm going to mainly focus on
Amani? Hello, Amani. All right. I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty again. Amani? All right, he's still here, so this must be some really, really interesting information, boy, because the line keeps going in and out. Amani? Hello, Amani? He's probably talking and doesn't even know we can't hear him. Hello? Okay, let me see if I can send him a text message. Amani?
That's Cuffy.
Amani?
Yes.
Amani, you went out for a couple of minutes. Just as you started going in on mainly focus on, you went out.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you didn't hear? Okay.
No.
Okay. Sorry about that. Well, the work I'm going to focus on would be a work called The Yamasee War by William Ramsey. Okay? And now the Yamasee, on previous shows, I gave the physical description of what they looked like. Very melanin rich, very dark hue, curly hair, thick lips. So we know what they physically looked like. So the Yamasee War occurred in the year 1715. But prior to that, there's an individual whom the settlers called Kufi. They named him Kufi. I guess the way they couldn't pronounce his real name in his language, but they said Kufi. Kufi's very important because although during the Yamasee War, certain battles the Yamasee had won, but they actually lost the overall war. And one reason was because of Kufi. So we can actually call Kufi a snitch. And we get into the record. It talks about Kufi, who had received commendation from the House of Assembly on August 12, 1715. Because Kufi, 4 months before the Yamasee had planned to attack the British settlers, had told the settlers about the Yamasee plan to destroy them. And based on that information, they awarded Kufi a sum of 10 pounds and they gave him a coat. So that was the reward Kufi got for giving out information about the Yamasee plan. Now, why would Kufi do that? Why would he do that? Well, the reason why was because Kufi actually was not Yamasee. He's from a different nation of Moors. And Kufi's sister was captured by the Yamasee during one of the Yamasee raids. And so he had envy because of that, and he wanted to get back. So based on that, and because of that experience that he had to endure and suffer from the Yamasee Nation when they took his sister, to get back at them, he alerted the British settlers that the Yamasee will plan to attack you, and based upon that, the Yamasee were not actually successful in the overall war. But now let's get into details about, I just mentioned the word raids. Now, let's get into this here deeply. Now you have what's called the creek riverbeds that are along in with the corporate area of Georgia and around that area, and so they're mistermed the Creek Indians, and of course we have another misnomer, Cherokee, and so forth. But let's get into some of this information here. All right. Now, this comes from the Yamasee War, so anyone can get this source and get this information from this source called the Yamasee War. And on page 74, it talks about, for example, the Yamasee and Lower Creek human raiders may have begun to experience difficulties prior to the Yamasee War. Their principal hunting targets, the Appalachee and Gullah, had been, their numbers have decreased. So as a result, the Upper Creek had targeted the Choctaw, so-called Choctaw, and other native Asiatics who were allied with some French settlers. And we can get deeper here. So here's an example of so-called Creek, Chickasaw, and Yamasee going on hunting raids. Now, these hunting raids are basically about people, so going into certain areas, taking people and putting them into forced servitude. So, but this was Moors doing this to other Moors. We can continue. Now, the so-called Cherokee. Now, this here occurred during the year 1714, and the nation was called, the English called it the Uchis. That's Euchees. And it says here on page 83 of the Yamasee War that the raid itself stood out as brutal. A number of the besieged Uchis, trapped in their own house, chose to kill their own people to spare them a life of forced servitude or worse. Now, this here was a Cherokee human raid, an example of that there. So here again, nations of Asiatics against each other. And of course, during this time, before the settlers came, these events had occurred, and when the settlers that arrived, they were the ones that were actually, bartering other Asiatics with settlers to exploit their physical labor. So all these events occurred in the Americas, North America specifically. Now, of course, today, the color story we get, for example, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the so-called story that the so-called Cherokee kicked out so-called former quote-unquote black slaves that they were slaves of the so-called Cherokee. But now we know, based upon the reconstructed histories, and because we're caught up in that sorcery, we're thinking that, oh, okay, black slaves who were slaves of Cherokee had rights to be in the Cherokee reservation, but then recently they were all kicked out, and if they could not prove by DNA testing, then they're no longer to be called or recognized as quote-unquote Cherokee. Everyone's familiar with that modern-day story, I believe, that happened a couple years ago. But we must, now that we know that those certain so-called Indians were Asiatics, we can no longer fall victim for the misinformation or the lies. Okay, so I wanted to make that clear there for the family there. So here we have established for the record that there were certain Asiatic nations who were warring with each other, fighting each other, and putting each other in forced servitude conditions. So we can, if anyone has a question before I move on, please feel free to ask.
All right. If anyone has a question, please press number 1, and it'll put you in the upper portion of the queue.
Now, before we get to the questions, I want to also share this with the family here about the Yamasee here, for example, based upon the work the Yamasee wore. Now, here's an example of clear Asiatic cultural tradition here, and it states here on page 49 that the Yamasee, like other southeastern Indians, practice a matrilineal system of descent reckoning, in which a man's first order of obligation was not to his own wife or children, but to his sister and her offspring. And then it continues, marriages between English traders and autochthonous women were not uncommon. Indeed, they were considered a standard order of business by many traders, providing them with instant clan privileges that extended far beyond the woman's home village. So basically, here's an example of the traders, settlers coming over, marrying Asiatic females to get controlling interest in land. And based upon this information, it was a standard practice. So I just wanted to share that along with the family. Also, the matrilineal descent reckoning system of these particular Asiatics as well.
Wow. So basically what that says is it supports the whole order of the Moorish Nation, which is a matriarchal society, in that it is never the offspring of the sons that the line passes through. It's always the mother.
Exactly, because then remember, the female being the true possessor of the sovereignty or the land or the resources, the man can marry a female that's not part of that line, and so that child from that particular union is not connected, but his sister will always remain connected. You see, so So his obligation was to his sister's offspring.
Because she's the heir.
Exactly.
All right. I have a caller, 803-297. Please state your title and where you're calling from. Oops, sorry about that. Wait a minute. All right. Mr. Dropped off. All right. If anyone has a question, here you go again. All right. 803-297, please state your title and where you're calling from.
Islam, this is Brother Jelani Bey. Hey, Brother Amani, how you doing, good brother?
Oh, Islam, Jelani. How you doing, Grand Chief? Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, same here, bro. Yeah, you know, because the common belief is that the Red Indians sold the Asiatic into slavery. I mean, it's very interesting that you're mentioning that these were rivaling tribes. They were all Asiatic. They were all dark. So, are you with the amalgamation of the European settlers and the Asiatic woman? Is this where the Red Indian came about? And were there any invasions from the north? Because one thing said that when the European first got here, we were like 2,000 years in the war with the Mongolians. Were you going to talk about that, or is that a factor in to make the differentiation between the dark-skinned Asiatic, Aboriginal, and indigenous people and the mixed breeds that became part of this nation as well? Islam, I leave the floor.
Okay. Excellent point there, Grand Sheikh. Well, first of all, we're told that you had a Mongoloid stock who had crossed the so-called Bering Strait from the north, and so, but also based upon what we were told in their institutions is that the so-called Mongol stock were not, so dark in hue. But now, I don't know. Last week, on last week's show, I went into the manuscripts about one famous Mongol stock of Asiatics, the Huns, and where I gave a physical description of the Huns, and that's interesting. You just brought that up there, Grand Chief, because just so it's clear for the record, on the so-called Asiatics from the east that they call Mongolians, we need to understand and make sure we're clear that they were also melanated. You see, so let's, for example, go to this article that I'd like to share with the family here. I believe I shared it with Anaid. It's an article called From the Taipei Times. Okay? Now, Taipei is in China. It's an island, small island, south of China. Also, Taiwan is the main city there in Taipei, very, very famous. I'm sure the family have heard of Taiwan before. And they put an article out in the year 2004. And the article from the Taipei Times covered this story about a particular tribe in Taiwan celebrating or performing a ritual, okay? And they perform this ritual every year. So the article, it's in honor of the little melanated people, okay? Now, let's go. I'm going to read directly from the article. For the past 100 years or so, the Saisiat tribe has performed the songs and rites of the festival to bring good harvest, ward off bad luck, and keep alive the spirit of a race of people who are said to have preceded all others in Taiwan. In fact, the short, melanated men the festival celebrates are one of the most ancient types of humans on this planet, and their kin survive today in Asia. They are found in the Philippines, northern Malaysia, Thailand, Sumatra, Indonesia, and other places. Chinese historians call them melanated dwarfs during the 220 AD to 8280, and they were found in the Qing dynasty from 1644 to 1911. And in Taiwan, they were also called the little melanated people because they had broad noses, very dark hue, and curly hair. And then it goes on to say that the story goes that they taught the modern Saciet tribe how to farm, but one day they say that one of the little melanated men sexually harassed a Saciet female, and they took revenge by killing him, and only two had survived. And the two that had survived lived up until the early 1900s, and the last ancient human phenotype individual died in the early 1900s. But every year they do perform this festival in order that the spirits of those original melanated men will not come back and bring bad luck to ruin their harvest. And this is from the Taipei Times. So here we have an example of the so-called Mongoloid, who's actually melanated. See, so if we believe their story that Mongolians crossed the some kind of Bering Strait from the north, well, they're still Asiatics. So to answer Grand Chief's question, that it would appear based upon the information that the current people calling themselves so-called Cherokee, who are less melanated, could be from the miscegenation that had occurred during the time of the settlers and the slaves coming over. You see, so, but when you go back into time by thousands of years, they're for the most part melanated, and we just provided an example of Mongolians from Taiwan being very, very melanated.
That article is so absolutely interesting. And you said, what was the year of that article?
The year of this article was 2004.
2004. And
yes.
This is something that they do every year. It's interesting that people outside of this continent have absolutely no problem recognizing, acknowledging, honoring, even praying that, praying to the Moors as a people, so that they can have good fortune. And it's interesting that, outside of this continent, that's not a problem. And, for people who are not familiar with the Japanese or even the Chinese customs, they're very, very, very superstitious. But at the same time, they're very exact with astrology as well. I mean, they do nothing without doing a chart. I mean, I know that's how it used to be. I'm thinking they still maintain that custom.
Yes, it's a unique solemn rite that they perform.
Yeah. So it's
right.
interesting. Now the other thing that I want to ask a question on, because you did cover it in the last show, Now, you did make mention in the last show that the Huns were Asiatic.
Yes.
All right, because I thought I heard you mention that they were. Or maybe I was just not hearing correctly. Maybe I'm just mixing it up. Trying to listen and monitor the book. I have to give kudos to Santasha. This is something to do. But please continue. And I just want to say, let's see, it is. It is 6 minutes after 11, and if anyone has a question, please press 1 so that you can get into the queue, and I would just ask that, make sure that your questions are, right to the point, and let's see, we have another question here from caller 410-664. Please state your title and where you're calling from.
Love and Light. I'm calling from the territory of Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. My name is Maya. I have a question I want to ask. I was hearing Grand Chief Jelani Bey talk about the red people, where they, I guess he was saying that they become the red people after the amalgamation. But I say that our people have a red cast, especially the brown ones. If they go out in the sun, you will see they have a red cast to them. Even though they're not light, they're brown. But I see it more and more in our people. So were they calling us because, were they saying we were the red people because in the sun we do have a red cast?
Is that your question?
Well, no, they weren't calling us that per se, but now there's an individual, and his name is Raphael. Rafsanovsky. Okay, he's important because he was the one who had tried to decipher the ancient Olmec script. And he wrote a series of letters called the Four Letters that sits in the Peabody Museum in Harvard University. Now, in those letters, in the first letter, he talks about the construct, the red man, being just a construct used to strip the birthright and to hide the true identity of who the autochthonous Asiatics were. Oh, now, okay. I don't have that letter with me here, but next show I will bring that to share with the family, where he says that, there is never such a people in North America. It was a construct. So I will bring that particular information from Rafsanovsky next time.
Okay.
But of course, you had offspring of Asiatics with Albions, and of course, that went on for many years, and that would produce a less melanated Asiatic. Yes, of course you had that.
No, this is not. I'm not talking about a less melanated Asiatic. I'm talking about highly melanated Asiatics. Like when I be outside exercising, running, I see this a lot, and they are highly melanated. And I'm saying, can't people see this red, this beautiful red that's coming out of their skin, and they're not light at all?
Now, sometimes if you take, for example, the Maasai over on the other continent that they call Africa today. Now, if you notice, they for celebration rites, sometimes during
they put red clay.
They put red clay on.
Right.
You see? Right. So many Asiatics did that. So.
Oh, he didn't came off.
Oh my. All right. Amani? Oh, geez. Okay, he's still, wait a minute. Let me just make sure. Alrighty. Okay. He has completely been kicked off the line. Alrighty. That must have been a very, very hot topic because it kicked him right off the phone. All right, I'm going to have to wait for him to call back in. So while we're waiting for him to call in, yes, I'm still waiting for him to call back in so we can finish our discussion. Well, you know, hold on a minute. Amani, let's see. This is really interesting. Let's see if I can text him. All right. I guess I'm going to have to wait for him to call back in. All right. Well, you know, for anyone who is still who would like to continue, it's about 14 after 11, and I just want to remind you that at 11:30, the line is going to go. I'm sorry, for the people in the chat room. At 11:30, the chat room and anyone who's listening online, the call is going to go offline. So if you want to continue after 11:30, hopefully Amani will have called back in by then. If you want to continue past 11:30, if we should go beyond 11:30, you need to start calling in to 858-357-8450. And let me see if Amani is back on yet. Wow, this is really interesting. You can tell that this is some really good information because on all the times that I've ever listened to Civil Alert, I have never heard it disconnect this much. Oh, here we are. Here he is.
Amani? I'm back. Yes. Wow.
Oh, wow. I was like, oh, wow, that must be some powerful information you're getting ready to drop. I've never known Civil Alert to drop in and out like this before. So, anyways, continue where you, if you can recall. I still have Sister Maia. Sister Maia, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm still here.
All right. So we can continue where we left off.
Yes, I think we were talking about the red slave use of servants in Asiatic societies. So I think that whole tradition
Wow.
Hold on. You're breaking up now.
Am I there?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so we were talking about the red clay that they would use to paint their faces for certain ceremonies. And so that maybe it came from that tradition there.
Okay, I get you. I get you.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but the so-called red man and the Hollywood image that we get when it comes to North America, that is a construct.
Okay. Thanks for clearing it up, brother.
No problem there. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to just to again share with the family there, Anaid, about the Huns, because I did mention on the last show about the Huns, and I would like to kind of just give that information again so everyone's clear.
All right.
And now this comes from the Chambers Encyclopedia, and this is the 17th century encyclopedia, and it has a whole section on the Huns based upon the translated work that came out of the language. Now, I'm quoting directly from this here work, and it states, the Huns were of Asiatic origin. Now, this is from the work. They used the word Asiatic way before the prophet, and this is way in, so let me continue here. The Huns were of Asiatic origin, and in all probability of the Mongolian or Tartar stock. Therefore, akin and perhaps identified with the Turks. Okay, so it goes on that the Huns who invaded the Roman Empire were lineally descended from the Hong Nao, whose ancient seat was an extensive but barren tract of country north of the Great Wall of China. About the year 200 BC, these people overran the Manchurian Empire, defeated the Manchurian armies, and drove the Emperor Cao Ti out. Okay, so these are the Huns, so-called Mongolians, Tartar, but they're Asiatic. And then it goes on. The Huns are described as being of dark hue, almost jet, basically midnight. And it says that they had a shrill voice. They had broad shoulders, flat noses, and were almost destitute of body hair. Okay, so that's a physical description of the Huns, so-called Mongolians, who are Asiatic.
Wow, that is amazing. And what's interesting about what you just read is it should tell the Moors, specifically on this continent, that if you really want accurate history of not just the Moors but the world, you absolutely must go outside of this continent, because what you're getting on this continent is an absolute fabrication.
Indeed.
Absolute fabrication. If you like, I got two more callers in the queue if you're ready to take more questions.
Sure.
All right. Caller 313-394, please state your title and where you're calling from.
Greetings. This is Song Min calling from Detroit area.
Peace.
Peace. This is really something. I had a question. I kind of like when I read books, I like to go to the end or past. I look at the question first, so I kind of like the answers. How did we get to where we are? If it was more against more. I'm still, like, confused on how we ended up in this state.
Well, I know that, we are taught that, Moor versus Moor, so we're thinking brothers can't do this to brothers, but we have to first understand that we had Moors of different nationalities. So, and again, when we're dealing with, for example, and we go to Spain or Al-Andalus, and we have the famous Moor killers, and they're national heroes of Spain. That's El Cid and Gustavo El Bueno. But those were Moors, but they're called Moor killers. You see, so history, and that's a great question, because I asked the same question to myself for many years early on. And based upon the information, it was always a struggle for resources, power, and resources. And in the case of the Moors in Europa, at some point in time, they were actually cut off from many of the natural resources the Moors in the Americas had. Because of that, that caused a war. You see, so where the Moors in Europa wanted to get reconnected to those resources because they were cut off. And I'll get into that on another show. So that's an example of Asiatics fighting each other for resources. And I gave an example of the Scottish being descended from Princess Scota, and the Pharaoh sending his daughter and a regiment into that particular territory. Why did he do that? Well, because for the tin. At that time, that area produced most of the tin for the world. So here's another example of Moors moving into another area where there are already autochthonous Moors for control of a natural resource. You see, so based upon the historical information, I think that one of the causes had to do with resources.
Right. And, I just want to, also say, one of the things, my famous line, my mantra, my motto is study, study, study. And I say it quite all the time, really, because it's so much to study, and it's so many incorrect concepts that we have to get clear on within our own brains, because we have been given such misinformation. So when you start really studying, what you're going to find is that everything, as I said at the beginning of the show, everything that is going on planet Earth, everything from the beginning until right now in time is all about Moors fighting Moors. That's it. Moors fighting Moors. And we are at a place in history where we must stop this fighting our brothers and sisters. We've got to stop it. The prophet said that we're going to need each other more now than ever before. And the only way that this Moorish nation, which is the Moabite nation, is going to rise is if we stop fighting each other, because we would never, ever, ever be in this state if we weren't fighting each other. Slaves would never have been able to rise up and sit in our seats if we weren't so busy fighting each other. So that's what we need to get in our head. If nobody mysteriously came out of the sky or up out of the earth and did this to us, we did it to each other. And you know what? We're still doing it to each other today. And we've got to stop it, because that's the only way that the Moorish nation is going to rise. And I just want to let everyone who's in the chat room or listening online know it is 11:26, and you need to call in to 858-357-8450 because it's going to go offline at 11:30. And with that, I think I got one more caller. Caller 313-850. Please state your title and where you're calling from.
My name is Bantu Ali Bey. I'm calling from the Michigan territory.
All right. Peace.
Peace. I'm calling to ask Brother Amani about a book he mentioned a couple of weeks ago. He said it was released in the 70s, and the author discussed how they had switched places with us, having us believe that we were the Negroes and or the slaves based on the media and television and things like that. But he never mentioned the author or the title, so I was calling to see if I could get that information.
Right, okay, great point. Sorry about that. The author is Michael Hoffman, and the title of the work, just to directly quote the color title, is They Were White and They Were Slaves by Michael Hoffman.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Well, thanks very much for that information. You guys are doing an excellent job, and I want to continue to listen.
All righty. Thank you for your call.
Yeah, I want to share this with the family here because this is very, very important. This has to do with Christoper Columbus and who actually funded his whole operation. This comes from a letter, the direct minutes, basically, that from the, basically at the time, 1932, the ambassador to Turkey in 1932, his name is Charles H. Sherrill. Okay, now he was in 1932 he was the ambassador to Turkey, and at that time, the U.S. they were interested, and basically the Library of Congress actually bought some ancient maps, and some of these maps were used by Christoper Columbus because he used the Piri-Reis maps. And these maps were in the possession of a Yusuf Akor Bey, who was the deputy and president of the Historical Society in Turkey. Okay? Now, this information, these comes from an author or an editor, Charles H. Hapgood, and the name of the work is Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Now, of course, in this book, he has copies of many of the ancient maps found all over the world, and the Library of Congress actually purchased most of these maps. And they actually sit in the Library of Congress. And, of course, the most famous Worcester map they have bought for, I believe, 10 million notes. But let me share this information with the family here. And this here is a letter, and the Honorable Secretary of State, dated August 12, 1932. I beg to further report that yesterday there came to lunch with me at the embassy a Yusuf Akor Bey, deputy and president of the Historical Society in Turkey. He tells me that the 1513 map of the Turkish admiral has been returned to him, and he promises to secure it for me. because this is the copy that is desired by the Library of Congress. He brought with him and presented me with 7 more photographs, and he explained to me as follows. A, shows 2 pages of the book in which the Turkish admiral described these maps and how he translated these maps, and he presented them to the Sultan Selim I of Egypt, who was carrying out an invasion. Photograph B shows the Straits of Gibraltar with portions of Spain and Africa. Photograph C shows the French Riviera and Italy. Photograph D shows the Italian shore from Pisa to the mouth of Tiber. And so photograph E shows the island of Rhodes. Photograph F gives more islands, and the photograph G is from another map, and it shows an area that it doesn't give a specific name to. And then it says, Yusuf Akor Bey insisted upon calling my attention to the fact that all the writing of these maps were in the Turkish language and very little Arabic. And then he goes to say these maps had the name Christoper Columbus 8 times. And it states that Cologne was of Genoese birth, not from Spain, as certain Spanish writers have suggested. It tells that Cologne, who was in possession of these maps, applied to the Genoese authorities for ships and money to enable him to cross the sea. But they declined him. So Christoper Columbus went to the Bay of Spain. And the Bay of Spain was convinced and supplied Christoper Columbus with ships and money. And then it states that Cologne went out and returned with gold and other treasures and brought back to the Bay of Spain. And it says, respectfully yours, Charles H. Sherrill. Okay, so here we have documented from the record where the Library of Congress purchased some ancient maps in August of 1932 when the ambassador of Turkey met with Akor Bey, who sold these maps to the Library of Congress, and these particular letters that had Cologne's name in there 8 times. And we were told that Cologne was funded by Isabel and Ferdinand. But obviously that's not true, because based upon this information, a Bey funded him, a Moor funded him. See? So, and Christoper Columbus, after his first voyage, returned with gold and other treasures and presented that particular Moor or that Bey in Al-Andalus. So again, here's another example of Moors in a certain geographical region of the planet lacking resources, wanting more resources, and basically declare war on the Moors in the Americas. Now, I don't know if the family has the work by Jack D. Forbes called Africans and Native Americans. The most important thing about this particular book is actually the cover. On the cover, there's an image of 3 Moors dressed in very Al-Andalusian type dress, holding spears, but they have gold earrings on, gold nose earrings in their nose. No one actually ever got into the image on the cover of the book, but I did. And now I went to Al-Andalus last year, and in Madrid there's the Museo de America de Madrid. which is a museum of America, and it's located in Madrid. And I went there, and this painting is still there. And this painting, Jack D. Forbes used this image and put it on his book called Africans and Native Americans, which I think Jack D. Forbes was actually dropping a jewel to us that no one ever picked up on. So I did the research. Now, these images are Asiatics who are autochthons to the current location, Ecuador. And you have three people. The middle individual is actually the father, and the two positioned behind him are his sons. And they are autochthonous to what's called Ecuador today, and the painting was painted in 1599. And this particular image sits in the Museum of America in Madrid, Spain today. So I just wanted to bring this up because here we have autochthonous Asiatics, and they have these gold piercings and gold earrings on, and so it kind of supports Cologne being funded by the Bey of Al-Andalus to bring back gold, because obviously the Americas in particular had a lot of that particular resource that a lot of people desired and wanted. And many Moors, and of course we got to understand the Moors in Europa, especially in the northern part, they don't have a lot of natural resources there. That particular geographical location is not abundant in gold, you see, so they had to go to other areas to get that particular resource. And of course, if they were cut off, you know, that would cause problems where Moors would fight other Moors for that desired resource.
So clearly, this trip to by Cologne, who today is known as Columbus, clearly that trip was not to discover any new land barren, you know, allegedly barren of a civilization and a government in full swing. Clearly, that's not the case.
Exactly. Yes. It was to get reconnected to the natural resources, and his whole expedition was funded by the Bey of Al-Andalus, a Moor, an Asiatic.
And that would also support the information that, you know, a lot of Moors go into various areas of this continent and they will find grants and charters. And one of the things that was a little bit confusing for me when I was getting this information is, okay, the implication in my mind, I'm sure with other Moors, is that they're getting a grant and or charter from George to the land, when in truth what they were getting was a grant and or charter to engage in commerce. And
yes,
that's why they had the various different companies, for example, the Virginia Company, the East India Company. So the charters and or grants was never about, okay, I'm giving you land. It was about, no, I'm giving you an area on this continent where you can engage in commerce.
Yes. And that was clearly discussed between George Washington and the Caliph, for example, in that particular letter. But now, of course, you know, they had to pay their tribute, their tax to the sultans, which was a practice by the Moors in Europa in particular. And on a subsequent show, we're going to actually get into that whole system as well, about taxes, tribute, and how the Moors of Europa instituted that system. For example, now I didn't get into this. We'll do this in a subsequent show where I basically today we painted an image of Europa and the different wars that had occurred during those time periods, and the players were Asiatics. Now we have to also understand that the Albion during that time, what was their position in the society? Now we'll get into that in more detail on the subsequent show, but I can give an example. For example, in the 13th century, in the streets of London, an Albion could not look directly in the eyes of a Moor. They couldn't drink or eat in the presence of a Moor. Those were violations punishable by death in extreme cases. And in the year 1237, the Dani, or the Danes, took that business, the slave business, into eastern part of Europa, what's called Russia today, and forced them into that condition in 1237, and then would put up a puppet prince, and they will receive a tribute, and it states in the record that when the Asiatic king arrived there, they had to serve him a drink, and if the drink spilled on the floor, on the ground, they had to lick it up. So all this is documented, and so the position in the society between the Albion and the Moor was very, very different, and we're talking Europa. So the family needs to get that clear. We'll clear that up and on subsequent shows as well. But now we're just dealing with today's topic, Moor versus Moor.
Right. And the other point that a lot of people might not be aware of is Christoper Columbus was absolutely a Mason, but he is not the first one to make this trip to what they call the Americas. There was actually a trip that was made previous to Christoper Columbus, which we know as Columbus, and that actually is very well documented, and so we like and you're not going to find that information. Actually, I got it from a book, but it wasn't a book that was written over here. It was actually written by an author out of Europa, or what we know today as Europe, Great Britain. Interesting, that if you really want accurate world history, even as it relates to this continent, you got to go outside of this continent to get it, So if anyone has any questions, please press 1, and so that I can show up in the queue. And for those who are in the queue and you have already pressed 1, if you want to ask more questions, to unmute and mute. Press 1 to clear out and then come back in. And any new calls. Anyone have any questions? All right, well, Amani, you're on.
Yes. Okay. So now, just to further share with the family examples, now I just highlighted some certain events in the Americas between certain Asiatic nations against each other, warring against each other, putting the losing side in forced servitude, etc. But since we're on that, I want to get into, to just bring this example up of how the birthright was stripped. And so, for example, in the particular work, the Yamasee War, on page 26, it talks about how they were interested in a process of transforming human beings from a state of freedom into forms of property. And the Carolinians found it necessary to improvise ways of legally dissolving the freedom of many Native Asiatics. So this comes from the Yamasee War, and it just gives an example of the particular settlers in what they call the Carolinas, and how they were trying to come up with processes and methods to transform humans into property, and also ways of legally dissolving their freedoms, right? You see, so these were solutions that they were trying to come up with during the 18th century in the Carolinas, and they just wanted to share that particular information. Now, also earlier from this work, I shared the information how many of the settlers would marry many of the Asiatic females to gain interest, controlling interest in land. And that was another method that they would use as well.
All right.
And further extrapolate on that birthright theft, coming from the same work, Yamasee War, on page 166, it states here that, moreover, by declaring that all Indians be termed and deemed Negro, it effectively maneuvered the gravitational pull of forced servitude, and which would have far-reaching implications that exist today.
Can you say, wait a minute, can you repeat that?
Okay, so here, it says here, moreover, by declaring that all Indians be termed Negro, this will effectively maneuver a gravitational pull to that side, which will have far-reaching implications that exist today. So basically, this is an example of them. First they called us Indians, but then they would take those that they called Indians and call them Negroes. So here's an example of that from the record. And so then by doing that, then the new so-called Indian would be from the union of when you would the offspring of an Asiatic with a less melanated or even Albion person became the new so-called Indian. So that's the issue we have today, where those who call themselves Native American or Indians are not really that melanated, correct?
Right.
And the melanated ones, they are called Negroes or currently African Americans. So it wasn't only Plecker. I know a lot of people had heard of Plecker. Plecker used a similar strategy. Well, this is way before Plecker. Mm-hmm. So here's an example in the 1700s where they used this strategy because at that time you had the amalgamated section in the Carolinas being dominant because, remember, what did it say? That some of the less melanated settlers would marry in to the nation, marrying the females. That was the order of the day.
All right. All right. I see I have, sorry, were you going to
go ahead. You have a caller?
All right.
Have a caller?
Yeah, I have a caller. Thank you so much. I think this might be Jelani, and so thank you so much for doing that so that you can get back into the queue. Caller 803-297.
Islam says, yes, it's me.
All right. Beautiful.
Yeah, I listen very well. But brother, you know, when you say Carolinas, that's my home base, and that's extremely interesting how that transition went from switching with the amalgamation and calling them Indians, and the original Indians calling them Negroes. People really need to know that. They really need to know and understand that, because you got like the Catawba and the PD and the Anahuia, that's here in South Carolina, and they are extremely amalgamated. You know what I'm saying? And although they have some of Moorish features, they tend more toward the Eurocentric, and the actual original inhabitants, or the real Moors, or those natives, they're under the impression that, like you said, they are Negroes. Now what publication was that you cited that information in? And what does that have to do with the Gullahs? How did that affect the Gullahs? That's a good question.
Oh, remember I read the a portion of the about the Gullahs when one of the raids, the Yamasee and the Cherokee had targeted the Gullahs and so many of their raids, and would put them into forced servitude. So I brought that up, but when it came to the work is called the Yamasee War. So this is the source, and it's from the editor is William L. Ramsey. That's Ramsey. And of course, he even admitted when he put this work out that the Yamasee aren't talked about, and his work is probably the only modern work to ever broach the subject matter of Yamasee. But when I got into General Woodward's work, Thomas Woodward, and gave a physical description of the Yamasee, we can understand why they don't really talk about the Yamasee in their current institutions, because you're dealing with Moors, us, basically. So, but this information is found in the Yamasee War, and it deals with the settlers in the Carolinas, and of course the Yamasee as well. So it's very, very important work, because it gets into the causes of the war, and as I mentioned before, the Yamasee were not successful in winning the war because of the settlers actually got information that they had planned to attack from Kufi. So yeah, this particular works get into detail about that whole about all those events during that time.
Jelani, did you have any more to ask?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, dear brother. So now, with the Yamasee in that area, and this the Traitor Kufi. All right, now
yes.
What role did the Gullahs have to play in this whole scheme of things? Were they in the picture yet? The Edisto Islands and that whole area there, were they in this picture yet, or this was something that progressed later on with the Stunner Rebellion and stuff like that? The Stoner Rebellion or stuff like that?
Yeah, it didn't really get into the Gullah. As I mentioned earlier, right during that time between 1708 and 1715, the Creek and the Yamasee had targeted Appalachian and Gullah Asiatics to put them into forced servitude. So that it only mentions the Gullah in that respect.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was the end of the questions for me. I appreciate you, man. You know, you smoking, bro. You doing your thing tonight. I'm gonna tune in more often.
Okay, thanks a lot, there, Grand Sheik. Talk to you later.
Thank you for your call.
No problem.
You know, I also want to just add a little bit onto you know, something that I experienced because a lot of us don't realize how many of these so-called Indian reservations are around in the area. And I had an experience in the Virginia area where me and my sister went to visit what they called Indian reservation. And each of us anymore, if you have the ability to go and visit one of these so-called reservations, and I'm saying so-called for a very specific reason, you're going to find some really interesting information. They tell you they're not the Indians, they're not the so-called Moors, so-called Moors. They're not the so-called Indians because if you look at our history, the Moors were branded as Brother Amani said, we were branded Indian and then Negro. Today, when you go to these reservations, you're expecting to see a lot of dark, melanated Asiatic people. Well, if you know the history. And what I ran into was, me and my sister went to this reservation. They were very much European-looking so-called Indians. The information that they had in their so-called museum, actually, you know, above it was a banner that said paleo, and I'm looking at this word paleo, and these people who are saying they're Indian, and then they have these various different artifacts and books in this so-called museum, and when you look at the book that they're using to reference we're the Indians, you're seeing that these people don't even know where they are or who they are, but they're the authority on the so-called Indians who are really Moors, branded Indians. And I really didn't have a good feeling about it at all. And so, to me, as I walked around, it was absolutely clear that this was all a fraud. And what confirmed it as a fraud was when we were leaving, me and my sister got lost. And we ended up having to turn into the driveway of a home that looked like a shack, and it was off the reservation. And when we pulled in, there was a screen door, and there was a woman behind the screen door. And she was so furious. I was picking up her anger. And she was dark, melanated, very darkly melanated. And what I picked up from her was that was the real war that was initially branded Indian and then Negro, who was not even on the so-called reservation that they so-called reserved for the Indians. It's now the Europeans on the reservation calling themselves so-called Indians who are really the Moors, and the Moors have been kicked off. So, we as Moors, we need to investigate a little bit of the things that's right under our noses, because that was right in Virginia. And who would have thought, So I just thought that was just such an interesting experience to have, because I really expected to go there seeing Moors, given the new information that I had received, or even a good interbreeding of Moors. So there was none of that going on. So that I just wanted to bring that out, because we do need to investigate what's right under our noses.
Well, right, and just to expand upon that, and to also answer the previous sister, I think it was Myra, who had called in, and her question was about the so-called Red Indian. Now, I do have one of my sources is the Norse, comes directly from the Norse records, the Antiquadas Americanae, of the Antique America in our modern translation. And here it states that it is notable. Now this Antiquadas Americanas was the basis of the source by Sampson in his work, The Popular History of the United States, 1876. And here, Sampson states that, at any rate, the American so-called Red Indians must have entered the Americas during the Christian era. Now, of course, Christian era, we're talking, 17th, 18th, 19th century, basically. And so it says here, it is notable that the 10th century Norsemen do not record the existence of so-called Red Indians in North America. They found Inuit populations in New England districts that were styled as dwarfs, who were described as very dark, with large eyes, broad cheeks, coarse hair. Okay? So this comes directly from the record. Now, when we're talking about the Inuit, for example, and I will share this next time with the family, there's a very important brother we all must know. That I know because I have his biography. His name is Matthew Henson. Okay? Now, Matthew Henson traveled with Perry, Robert Perry, not the Perry who came to Japan in the 1800s, but it was a different Perry. And because of Matthew Henson, they went to other parts of North America like Alaska, Greenland, and they were able to come across those particular territories and make maps. But that was all based on Matthew Henson. Now, in Matthew Henson, we're talking late 1890s all the way up to early 1906. And they made many different voyages. Now, up there on the first trip there, when Matthew Henson got off that ship, and when the Inuit saw him, they ran up to him, they hugged him, and they said, "Welcome back home. What happened to you? You wandered off and lost your tongue." And they called him Inuit. Now, and now of course they saw Robert Perry, who was an Albion, and he was kind of curious to them because they'd never seen an Albion before. And so that whole theory of that they teach us, there are no melanated people in the cold areas of the planet, because they'll develop rickets and all that kind of hogwash, where the Inuit were Asiatics and melanated. Now, when they saw Matthew Henson, they said he wandered off and lost his tongue, and so recognized him as being autochthonous to the Americas. And then he ended up marrying an Inuit female, and Ebony Magazine, in I believe it was the 80s, did an article because Matthew Henson's great-grandson came from Alaska to visit his dad's grave site, and Ebony Magazine actually ran an article on that. So you can get the biography of Matthew Henson and anywhere, maybe Amazon, and it will tell the story of Matthew Henson when he went up to Alaska and Greenland, and the Inuit recognize him as being autochthonous to the Americas. And this is the same area which I just read from the Norse records in the 10th century. When they got there, they were melanin rich, not so-called no red man per se.
Mm-hmm.
So we just destroyed the cover story that's prevalent, unfortunately prevalent in their institutions.
All right. We're going to take another caller. Caller 410-664. Please state your title and where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Sister Maya again. Sister, you are absolutely correct. I've never been on the reservation, but I went to a powwow. I went 2 years straight. The first time when I walked in there and I seen all these Albion-looking so-called Indians and some look like Mexicans, and I said, well, we're the real ones. We're the real ones. See, I didn't know that I was considered, a Moor then, So I said, well, we are the real ones. And the second year I went, and I saw the same exact thing. So you are correct. I just wanted to say that. You are correct. And I had promised myself I would never go to another one.
Well, it's always interesting to go, just to check it out, even if it's just for one time. Because you never know what information you're going to find there. Because even it's interesting, even when they try to tell what they claim to be their history, they end up telling ours. So it's good to look at all information, a lot of information, but you got to first have your foundation really firm, because it can really turn you around.
You're correct.
So let's see. It is 8 after 10. It's 8 after 12, and so we, if there's anyone who has a question or would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. If you have previously raised your hand, if you can press 1, and it will take you out of the queue and then put you back in, and I'll be able to find you. If not, back to you, Amani.
Okay, yeah. So, again, just to get back to the particular topic, subject matter, Moor versus Moor, we established for the record that the Moors in Europa, and we had highlighted a couple of wars, important wars for supremacy of Europa, the War of 844 and the year 1106, and we also established for the record how King Henry VIII sapped the last remaining power of the priest class as well, who were also Asiatics there. And then we came across to the Americas, where we established for the record that certain Asiatics in the Americas fought each other as well. So what I really want to impress upon the family is that we need to have our concepts correct, and we need to shed the fear, because we've been indoctrinated by the misinformation that the Albion brutalized us, did this to us, did that to us, and that's the picture that we get all the time. That's not the truth. That's not what happened, because only a Moor can defeat a Moor.
Yes, right.
So we need to, from this moment on, stop giving power to the Albion there. We need to stop that, because if we don't do that, they feed off of us our fear, and they're sitting and smiling and laughing in the background because we're just giving everything up to them.
Yeah.
You see, we hear stories, for example, I mean, like in the place they call Egypt, when they talk about the shepherd kings, right? They call the shepherd kings, and we're talking about the period of the 15th, 16th, 17th dynasty, where the so-called shepherd kings that they say were Albions, and they came in and took over the dynasty, and it didn't, you know, they remained supreme for what, from 15th to the 17th dynasty. We get fed that horse fertilizer. Do not accept fertilizer. You shove it right back into their face. How can the shepherd kings, when we're talking 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, be Albions? They didn't, you know, and defeat Moors. And so they just went out. I mean, again, if they were so powerful, remember, the story that we get, if they were that powerful, as long as we've been on this planet together with them, they always dominated us. That's the only accurate inference we can draw from that information. Because as soon as we start talking about ancient African civilization, so-called, but if the Albion was existing during that time, we didn't have a civilization, because based upon the Jesuit information, they would have took it from us.
Right.
Because they're so powerful and we're so weak, they can come in, take it, rape our women, and rape the men too. This is the fertilizer that they've been feeding us, and we've been eating it, but it must stop.
Yes.
Because any current Asiatic men, for example, that will eat that fertilizer and put out to the ethers that not only did they rape their women, that they were raped by them, you need to stick your head in the dirt and don't show up again on the planet. Just go somewhere and just die off. Because that is disgusting and it's embarrassing.
Right. Well, we have another caller. Caller 209-277. Please state your title and where you're calling from.
Islam, this is Brother Fontaine, calling from west of Exum.
All right, Islam.
Islam,
Islam, Brother Amani, nobleman, Islam panel. I just want to say that it goes back to what we're always discussing about who is who. And most people need to understand there's some key words to let them know exactly who is who. When you look in your dictionary, when you look in encyclopedias, and so on and so forth, if you see the word ancient, arcane, archaic, it's us. I don't care if it says Roman. I don't care if it says Greek. It's us.
That's right.
There was nobody else. It was just us.
That's right.
And then they came later, and then you have the Oriental and Occidental mixing, which is basically political systems and idealisms. But yeah, definitely. And people don't those are two important words as well, Oriental and Occidental. Oriental means to rise in the east, to rise. Occidental means to fall. You know how when you go to a meeting or orientation and you're sitting, it'll be facing the east. The magistrate sits in the east. And, in the Orient, all of the upliftment. Definitely, those are important terms to know if you want to know who you are: arcane, ancient, Oriental, and Occidental. They always let you know who is who.
That would be very interesting, to really observe and research into.
Beautiful show tonight. Awesome show. Very informative.
Yeah. And it is 12:15, and we have about 10 more minutes to take some questions. And did you have anything more that you wanted to add, Fontaine?
I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to speak, and with that, I respectfully yield the floor.
All righty.
Islam. So just to continue that, you know, we are the new Moors, the new Asiatics, and our eyes are open, and we can see, and we will no longer accept any fertilizer from anyone. You see, so once we understand concepts, understand language, denotative words, connotative, constructive words, the sorcery will no longer work. We can break the spell easy. You see, so and it's all around us. The real information is right in our face. We just need to open our eyes and look. You know, so you know when you know people talk about, oh, the Spanish did this, the Spanish did that. Well, the Moor killers, the national heroes who are engraved in stone, if you go to Madrid, you can see them. You can see the Moor killers, but the Moor killers were not Albions; they were Moors themselves.
Right.
You know, so you want to talk about the British, so-called British Empire, how they went around and they became some powerful empire. Well, we just established for the record, not only on this show, in previous shows, that the nobility of not only England, of all of Europa, were Moors. The constructors and founders of the original Union State Society, which came out of the Virginia Company, were Moors. Charles II and Francis Bacon. So just look in the mirror. Just look in the mirror more.
Right. And you know, and also, you know, what you will find is, you know, it's absolutely imperative to know who is who. You know, because in knowing who is who, then you know what is what. And as I said earlier, the original, the Catholic Church, the Pope, the Jesuits originally, they were Asiatic. Now,
and we just established that from the record today.
Right. So now, if we put that in perspective, now we add in the Treaty of Verona, which we hear a lot about. When you read the Treaty of Verona is a treaty amongst the Moors. And what they are affirming in that treaty is to never, ever, ever allow the slaves to be free. And anyone, whether you're a family member, well, that's all you could be as a family member, right? If you assisted the slaves, which is the Europeans, in becoming free, then those Moors will war against you until your line is completely extinct. And so what we Moors on this continent, because we did assist the Europeans in obtaining their freedom and even assisted them and funded them in starting their Union Nation, we catch hell today because of that, still. So, you know, when we look at who is who and the whole topic of this show today, Moors, you know, Moors against Moors, that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. If any of us have gone into any of these facilities that they call courts, 9 times out of 10, if you're Asiatic, you're going to stick an Asiatic in front of you. That's Moors fighting Moors. If you are pulled over by a police contractor and you're Asiatic, 9 times out of 10, that contractor is going to be Asiatic. If you're being held hostage in the prisons for ransom, your jailer, your overlord, or the overseer in those establishments, you're going to be Asiatic. So what Europeans have gotten us to do is continue fighting each other, which is what we've always done. And meanwhile, they sit back and, you know, reap our inheritance, you know, put us out on the street, and we are so busy caught up in fighting each other, we don't even see the forest or the tree. And, you know, we have got to stop that. We got to stop fighting each other because, you know, if we look at our brothers and sisters around the world, they are waking up and they're getting together to get back to a united nation. We have to start doing the same thing. And let's see, it is 12:22. And with that, you know what? I'm going to have you to, you know, take, you know, maybe 2 minutes or so and just, you know, give us some closing remarks, some food for thought, and, you know, anything else that you feel might need to be added.
Yes. Well, we just basically covered general events, just to establish for the record that, you know, in Europa, for example, many of the major wars early on were wars with Moors. As Moors were the players against other Moors. We established that for the record. But what I want to do on the next show for the family is to go from the general to the specific. Now let's narrow our lens focus on certain players, individuals who are famous today and instrumental. And one such player, individual, that I will focus on in the next show will be Gustavo El Bueno, dubbed the Moor Killer, one of the national heroes of Spain. We will get into that next time in details because when I went to Al-Andalus last year, I visited Bueno's castle, and I got access to the great library there, and I bought 6 books from his direct, the Duchess, the former Duchess, who is a direct descendant of Bueno. She wrote many books that exposes all the misinformation and the lies that the Jesuits teach us. And I have some of those books I would like to share with the family. So let's pull an individual from that particular time who fought against other Asiatics, who himself was an Asiatic, and let's share this kind of information because, after all, it's called hidden history. And so a lot of this kind of information you'll never get exposed to. But I'm sharing this information with the family, and we're going to get into El Bueno's life and the offspring as well, because I have the manuscripts detailing the particular time period, because the Duchess, she was in possession of 6 million volumes dating from the 12th century up to the 18th century from her ancestors. So it's the greatest library in the world when it comes to what really happened with Spain and what they call the so-called New World.
Oh. Now, when you talk about the Duchess, just for anyone, especially myself, who'd like to go and find any literature written by her, what would you go and look for?
Well, you can do a Google.
Does she have a pen name, or do you just go and Google, any books, author, the Duchess?
Well, no, her name's Louisa Luisa, Isabel, Isa, Alvarez, Alvarez, Louisa Isabel Alvarez, the Duchess, the direct descendant of Bueno, and she was the, of course, called the Red Duchess in Spain because she was against the Spanish Church and for lying about the information about the world, and she was actually exiled in the late 50s, early 60s from Spain. But then the new prime minister, I believe in the 80s, allowed her to come back to her estate. But she's very, very important when it comes to understanding what really happened. And now, so you can Google, put in her name, Louisa Isabel Alvarez, and some of her works will pop up. But now, some of her books are very difficult to get. Now, when I was there, actually, in Al-Andalus last year, the Castle of Bueno is in an area called Medina Sidonia. Now, if you were to buy a map when you're there to try to find the location, the Spanish priest currently took her off the map. She's not even to be found on maps. So,
all right. Wow, that I know you shared that with me. But also I just want to say it is 12:27, and so it's 12:27. So what we're going to have to do at this time, unfortunately, it's just never enough time. Is we've got to close out now before we get kicked off the line. So. Thank you, Amani, for coming on and sharing this wonderful information. Look forward to another installation of the real history. And for everyone who has been faithfully listening, thank you so much. I am Anaid filling in for Santasha, and this is Civil Alert. Thank you so much, and have a peaceful night.
Peace.
Oh, little birdie, spring has sprung! Out with the old, in with the new. Like trading in the big store for Dollar General. You'll get the same big store savings without the big store hassle. And with no hike to the store, you're even closer to the name brands you love. Like fresh, tastic Gain detergent. It's spring in a bottle, people! Stop by Dollar General before Sunday, spend $15 on Gain scented items, and get $5 off your next trip. Dollar General, it's the fast way to save.